Susan, thank you so much for doing this. I so appreciate your willingness to do this interview. And as you know, you have stood out in so many ways as a woman leader to me for many years. So
Cheryl, so glad to be here, and I always enjoy our conversations. So, absolutely, and I love the work you're doing. So glad to support.
thank you so much. So I'd love to start by just a little background. I mean, you've been at REI in a number of different roles. So before we get to the role you're in currently,
Yes,
which is fairly recent, this particular one, I know you've gone back and forth with some of it, but tell me, you've been there for almost 30 years? Is that right?
it is a little over 28 years. Yes, and I am just as surprised. I am used to being kind of the new person at REI for so long that I never expected to be the veteran.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about like what brought you to REI in the first place and what has kept you there?
Yeah. Well, I found out that I loved the buying space and I loved retail, but I had been in a department store and it's much more of a micromanaged culture. And so I was really looking to take those skills to something that was more values aligned. And I had a vendor introduce me to REI. I knew about REI because I'd grown up in the Northwest, but had never really thought of them as somebody I would might pursue a career with. And it was really through that introduction. And I instantly fell in love with the brand, with the company, with the people, and loved being able to kind of do something for customers who were committed to themselves getting outdoors, and also for a company that, really wanted to do more than just make money. From the very beginning, it was about what we could do, the mission, and how to outfit employee customers, and then how to also treat employees really well. So that's really what drew me in.
Well, it's funny when we think about purpose-driven companies in general, I talk a lot about, and I heard this from somebody else, I don't remember where, but the three Ps, obviously you've got to make some money, the profits and
Yes.
above and beyond operating expenses. But then there's also how you treat people, as you just said, and then the
Yes.
planet. Like, what are we doing to impact the environment? And REI, like, has gold stars in all of those things. I think you've been a very successful business for a number of years. I know things are a little challenging at the moment, but you've been really successful in all those ways. And you've been part of a lot of that as you've gone forward. So there's been a lot of iterations in your history. What has kept you there? I also know that I have no doubt. You've had a lot of people approaching you about other opportunities. So what
Yeah.
has kept you there so far?
It's, it's interesting. At first, I loved just the empowerment culture and being able to be a steward of your own business and, getting trust. Now, we were a much smaller, we were, 350 million. And of course, as you grow, you need more checks and balances and you need, different teams. And so that has iterated. But I would say it's really been seeing the company kind of evolve and grow and having a part in that and being able to kind of shape each chapter. And just about when I'm like ready to say, gosh, it's time for me to go do something else, we will get a new CEO or a new project and it'll really get me engaged. And so I think that's when I turned around and said, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's been this long. But really, it's, having those opportunities to work on projects or work for new leaders, or get new teams, is really kind of why I stayed. I think if I had just been doing the same thing for all of these years, I probably would have found a path for growth in other places. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a few things, and we'll get into this in just a minute, that have always stood out for me about you in particular as a leader. And having had a little bit of an inside view, obviously never worked for REI, but worked with a number of leaders there at a few different levels over, I don't know how many years at this point in time. But what's been interesting to me about you in particular is that everybody I've ever met, whether I was doing 360-degree interviews or something else, has loved and adored you as a
Oh,
leader. So not only have you been really respected by the people who report to you, I've only ever heard really good things about you from your peers,
oh,
and you have had opportunities made available to you by your CEOs, multiple CEOs, in lots of different ways. So you have been a person who's garnered trust for people at all levels in the organization and done that in such a combination of very gracious ways, very warm and human, and also, if I can use this term, you get shit done. I mean, you just make things happen. And so this lovely both and blend of people and teams, and also sort of the operational and visionary sides of whatever part of the business you have run at any given time. So I am, again, I'm a big fan, and I'm so honored
Oh,
to
Cheryl, you like
sorry.
very, very kind to share those words. And I always appreciate that people feel that way. You certainly, you don't really know that. So to hear that from somebody else who's a neutral third party, really appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, as a coach, you get the inside scoop in a number of different ways. And the
Totally.
inside scoop on you has always been very consistent, as well as the
Uh,
external observations. So tell us, what are you doing now? What's your
So
background?
I've actually got to kind of pivot into a new space. And so I'm doing a lot of learning right now, Cheryl, but my current world is Chief New Ventures and Impact Officer. And so I both steward the company's oversight on sustainability, our philanthropic work through our REI Cooperative Action Fund, our community and government affairs, and then Path Ahead Ventures, which I had the opportunity to launch that work about 4 years ago now. And that is specifically our partners with founders of color in the outdoor industry. And then a new area also is what we're calling new ventures and partnerships. And it's really around finding ways that we take some of the key hallmarks of the REI brand, our reputation, our impact, our stores, our people, and then find people who want to partner or find ways to diversify revenue. So it's two different areas, but we were just talking about it this morning in my team meeting. The beauty of the new ventures and partnership work is it really helps the flywheel of the impact. And as you said, like there is no purpose without profit. And so we know it's super important that we both focus on what customers think and want of REI, but then we show up in living our values through our impact work too. So yeah, that is what I'm working on right now. I'm new in that space. It's just been a couple months, and so I have a lot to learn in sustainability, philanthropic, and in government affairs. So I'm diving in there, but I've got great teams, and then finding ways to kind of shepherd that and advocate that work through the co-op too.
Yeah, fabulous. And you've been moving in this direction for a number of years. I think I remember how many years ago when you stepped into Camber Outdoors, and women in leadership was a
Yes.
primary focus with Camber for sure. I'm gonna a question that I've got. I guess one more thing I'd like to say about that.
Yeah.
Ask a lot about career path and how you select your career path. And one of the things that I've always believed, having a little bit of history in vocational rehabilitation work, I'd worked with people
Yeah.
for a number of years who've been injured on the job and couldn't do the same thing. So trying to figure out what career fit looked like.
Mm,
And one of the things that I would say to people a lot of times is that career path for most of us, probably 97% of us, is what you see when you turn around and look backwards, and you can see the
yeah.
steps
Yeah.
that led you from one place to another. And I think about that with what you're doing now and the pieces and the stepping stones you've put in place that have really led to this. On a slightly different but related topic, I am curious. This may be, I recognize this may be a very hard question to answer, and
Okay.
I didn't tell you I was going to ask it.
Right.
So
You didn't tell me any of these, so
that's true. That's true. Off the cuff. It's a conversation.
totally.
So the question is, what I mentioned to you how much people love and respect you. And this is why it's a hard question. What is your perception about what you do that enables that? What
Mm.
invites people to love and respect you the way they do?
Oh gosh.
I
That
know
is
it's a hard
hard.
question. It's a very hard
I
question.
think, I'm thinking about that. I do really try to like understand people, like what motivates them, what they care about, and try and incorporate that into my relationship with them. And so how I build relationships is probably one thing. Another would be how I can advocate for them and show up as a business partner and somebody who wants to kind of clear obstacles. And then some of it is like I like to say workshopping, but like how do we get in a room and like talk about what we want to do and um, find that like North Star together. And then get after it. Like, be somebody who's like, okay, let's outline what those three things are that we're going to do. And then, what do you need to get that done? And how can I support you? So if I think about the times in which, I've had a new team, been able to set like, what is the work that we're going to do? How are we going to get there? And then accountability is another one. I think that doing that not in a punishment at all, but more just like an expectation. I have always had really strong people working with me and had high expectations of what they would deliver and how they engage. And I think that for a lot of those team members, just like they enjoyed that, right? They wanted to see movement happen. So I think that's and you said it, being human, being connected with people, caring for them is important too. So yeah, it's probably would be a good one for me to ask. So as, as you get a new team too, just making sure like, am I leaning into things that people found most valuable in the partnership? So
Mhm. Yeah, I hear a few things in that. One is the actual seeing people, to know who they are, identifying what
yeah,
their strengths are, what they love to do, and then co-creating with them. And I know a lot of women leaders get into this thing where there's this like crashing seesaw between wanting to be nice and kind and warm and human, and then
yeah,
getting frustrated because they don't get the performance they need and want. So then they get more directive, and then they feel bad because they feel like they're being awful. And so then they want to go back to being nice. A lot of female leaders, we really bounce because,
yeah,
in former years, we haven't had a lot of models. So a lot of us were trying this sort of command and control thing that was typically referred to as a male model of leadership. I don't think that's a pure delineation by any means, but
yeah,
and then saying, no, that doesn't fit. That's not quite right. I want to bring people together and doing that, and then not doing the piece that you mentioned before, which is the accountability. And I love what you said about people want to feel successful. I'm iterating a little bit on what you said.
yeah,
People want that accountability is helpful because people can see and measure progress, and people want to be successful. So holding some form of accountability that is co-owned and co-created, perhaps, that enables people to see their own progress, where they're hitting the mark, where they're not. There's no judgment in it. It's
yes,
it is
yes.
what it is. Yeah, I love that. Appreciate that. Um, a couple of things that I wanted to ask you about, because I said there's some things, every leader has some great strengths or things that at least stand out to me as some of their real superpowers. And we've talked a little bit about some of yours, this balance and blend or integration of this business accountability and the human side, the leadership.
Sorry, I have a dog that's crying and I don't get him up on the bed. Sorry about that. Okay.
No worries, no worries at all. That's the humanness, right? And what we just talked about that you did. And let's go there first with my question, because one of the things that's always stood out to me, and these two things I want to talk to you about that have stood out to me are related. But the first one is, throughout your very in a relatively short period of time, there was a lot of movement that you did up the org chart, like moving into positions of a higher and higher level of responsibility really fast. And I remember some of the conversations you and I had were about getting a personal assistant, and there was
Yes.
this dynamic about, I can't manage all of this myself. One of the things that stood out, you are and were a mom, and your kids were still in school, like middle school and high school, I think. I don't
Yeah.
think it was
They
elementary
were
at the time,
they
was
were in
it?
elementary. Yeah, they were in
Was it
elementary
elementary?
when
Oh
I
my God, was it
became as
that
a
long ago?
VP.
Um,
Yes.
you made a point of being an active mom, present with your kids as a growing executive in a very dynamic business with a lot of change and turmoil going on at that time as well. So how did you do that? How did you blend this very powerful, successful executive who is continuing to get promoted and whose scope at work got bigger and bigger and you stayed engaged at a very present level with your girls' activities and supporting your husband in his new business. And tell us about that. How'd you do it?
Oh, well, it was good having you as a coach when I first started as a vice president because I remember you asked me like, what are you most afraid of? And I said, I'm afraid that I won't have quality time with my family or that it'll impact the relationships. And so I think one, just being really conscious of that up front and not letting that just happen, right? Realizing that it's risk. And so I remember when you said, well, what's some things that we can put together as like a plan to help you with that? And one of the things that we talked about, and I still do to this day, is I really prioritize family vacations together. And as like that's time for us to be totally focused on each other and do fun things, just get out of the day to day. So, I just came back from a trip from Maui, so with a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old daughter. So, and they both love travel, but we have a lot of family memories that are about us doing things together and like, being fully present. So that was one way I would say like just setting aside that time. I think other things are with, your partner making some purposeful decisions on who is doing what and how you kind of balance family commitments together. Ben and I made a choice together when I was a couple years into the VP role, just for him to get in a work situation that had more flexibility. And it ended up being something he really wanted to do and uh, owning his own wine business. And but we also knew that like when the girls were sick on a Tuesday, he could go pick them up, right? And so building some of that flexibility in, and then planning ahead, like if I knew that the school was going to have an event, just getting that on my calendar ahead of time so I could work around and make sure I could be there as definitely as much as possible. But it's not easy for anybody whenever I realize like right now I have a divisional vice president who has a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I'm like that is hard, right? And so also just trying to be respectful of their time and making sure giving line of sights to deliverables or things you might need, but also trying not to pile things on over weekends or at night. So yeah, there's not an easy button on it, but I will say um, somebody once said to me like, because I think people struggle with like what will my kids think, and someone once said to me like your kids will appreciate whatever the situation is. And I think back now, my daughters will say, we're so glad you weren't the mom just at the school all the time. We really appreciated your seeing you in your role and seeing you like, oh, whether it's as a speaker somewhere or traveling to something, like they really valued that. And you realize like as long as you're connected in with them and you're engaged, that they're going to be excited about what your career looks like too. So yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. It was such a good model of how to do that. And it goes back, what I just heard you say is a couple of things. One is it goes back to how your ability to take those vacations and to feel okay about it and not feel like you have to conquer a total chaotic mountain when you get back. I mean, there's always a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
When you get back with emails and all that kind of thing. That's a given. But it's like the wheels don't fall off the bus, so to speak, while you're gone because of that co-creation you do with your team that we talked about earlier. So
That's a
I
great
think
point.
that's yeah, that's great. And the second thing that always stood out to me, I mean, I remember you going to the girls' events and doing things like that, like leaving work at a reasonable time
Yeah.
and still getting your stuff done. I mean, it's like you have been good at prioritizing, I think, things. And here's the second thing related to that is that I remember going into your office and you had this big whiteboard on the wall.
Yeah.
On that whiteboard was your schedule, your calendar, basically. And I remember seeing these big chunks of time that were planning time.
Yes.
One of the things that I recognized with you And me with an ADHD brain, I struggle with this. I try to model you and put these chunks of like planning time or strategic,
Strategy, yes.
all that stuff. I put it on my calendar. I've gotten a little better at doing that. But then it's like I don't honor it. I don't respect it. I let all this other stuff interfere with it. And you had really good boundaries around that. You actually not only put it on the calendar for everyone to see, because you had glass. I remember in your office where people could actually see that on the wall, and you respected it. So tell me about that whole sort of planning organizational stuff that provided both sanity for you, but also the performance for you, your team, and the part of the business that you were running.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder of that. That's actually something I had to learn into, Cheryl, because what I found is that I just wasn't getting ready
Mm,
for next deliverables. And then I realized if I didn't block out that time, I I was just going to be doing everything late at night. And I
mm,
think that like, and I started to realize like I wasn't as good late at night. I used to, used to be able to do that for a while, right? And then I think maybe as you get older, like just, that was not the prime time for me to be working. So having that, doing email at 7 o'clock at night is whatever, right? But doing strategic thinking or planning really needed to be earlier in the day. I will say, like, I need to get back into that rigor. And so sometimes now that uh, my husband works on Saturdays and my kids are at college, I sometimes use Saturdays as that kind of think, reflect, build out documents. That's not always great, but then it, also gives me open time other times of the week. If I've got other things going on. So I do think that's really good. But to your point, it's really about your learning style or how you process whether that works or not. I know that if I get into email, I will just stay there, right? Because I love the feeling of deleting something. And so I have to protect myself from myself sometimes and be like, okay, don't go into email. You've got to deliver this document or you have to do some thinking on it. So, doing that. And then the other thing that I find valuable is, again, workshopping with others. And so if I have that time set aside, we have a topic, we've done some pre-reading, we have things that we want to discuss in it, then that's usually makes for a really productive
mm,
conversation too.
mhm. Yeah, you were so wise and so disciplined in all the good ways. Here's another question that just came up for me is that a little bit of context. My experience is in working with a lot of women is that women in general, working with a lot of women and men, is that women tend to not resource themselves as well as men do typically. The classic sort of generic example is that when women were starting to in higher volumes move into these high responsibility high visibility roles, they were often trying to do all the stuff they did before. I have a
Yeah.
colleague who moved into a CEO role, and she was still like wanting to be home to cook dinner for the family all the time, and still cleaning the house and doing all this stuff while she's moved into this new role of CEO. And it's like, what the heck are you doing? It's like just adding things to your plate is not a
Yeah.
healthy thing.
Yeah.
And so
Agree.
women have this tendency to overfunction, to exhaust themselves with trying to do too many things and not pull in enough resources. In this conversation, we've already talked about the conversations we had with a personal assistant, and
Yes.
especially as Ben was moving into the new business, how much more important that was going to be.
Yeah.
I'm going to help with some of the orchestrating, the home stuff. And maybe you and I talked about the same CEO at the time who did just that finally, and hired somebody to just help, to be like, we
Yeah.
called it,
Yeah.
the paid wife kind of thing. And
Yes.
that's like,
Yes.
there's all kinds of gender stuff related to that. And I'm sorry, I'll apologize for that up front, but who took care of a lot of the home stuff that you didn't have.
Yeah.
But you also have resourced yourself well in other ways. Like some of the women leaders I work with, some of the men as well, but often the women leaders who have been reluctant to hire and train good executive assistants.
Yeah.
And my
Yeah.
experience is you've always had good ones. So tell me a little bit
Yes.
about resourcing yourself so you can let your magic
No, I have been fortunate to have an executive assistant at REI, which has been great, right? There's that person who can look ahead and say, this is what you have delivered, what's your plan to get there? Somebody much more than just doing calendaring, but really understanding what needs to be delivered at each place and how to get me ready for that and how to think about who else needs to be involved. So I've had that benefit. Certainly, we had a nanny over the years, and even when the kids went to school, they were time, having someone part-time to pick them up, get them, things that they needed addressed. That was a huge help. We also did yard and house cleaning were two things that we outsourced. I used to love to work in the yard and it was therapeutic, but that was before kids. And, you just have to decide like, no, I'm not doing that. Um, and then I used to do the cooking, and now actually my husband does the cooking and the shopping. And so just kind of like thinking about where pieces go and, where you spend your time. And, he likes it because he'd rather our free time be us together, right? Than one of us doing errands at that time. And so kind of, that's how we balanced it. But I was just speaking with somebody, I'm trying to think who this was just recently, and said to them, you really should consider a personal assistant. I think just, the idea. Now there's some things I still do all of our vacation planning because I love that. That's like my escape. Matter of fact, we joke that when I'm on vacation, I'm planning the next vacation. So there's some things that I still keep, doctor's appointments, those kinds of things where it's just ingrained. But there's the other thing I let go of was bill paying too. I used to do that. Now my husband does all of that too. So just finding those things that, you can shift and for him, he'd spend 3 hours mowing the lawn because he loves it so much. But that was something that he could shift off and then gave him time back for other things too. So
One of the things I hear in what you're saying, Susan, is this combination of where your heart leads you and what makes sense. So it's both a
yeah,
head and a heart thing. Because a lot of times you'll hear people say, I've heard this a lot, where they just go into the head part and say, what's your time worth? And then if you can
yes,
hire something out for less money than what your
yeah,
time is worth, and do it. And I said, well, that's one dimension. That's half the dimension. The other dimension is, what is the stuff that feeds your soul? What is
yeah.
the stuff you love? And although gardening served that purpose for you for a while, it didn't serve enough of that purpose to make it worth you continuing to do that. So what do you do now that feeds your soul, that you like
Uh,
doing, that you could?
I do plan trips, right? I do I do vacations. Uh, you know, Gracie and we made a commitment to go hiking once a weekend, and so, getting out doing that. I love spending time with our little Yorkie, and so like, when he's sitting on my lap at the end of the day, it's just, really nice. And then my husband and I, we love food too, so we love to eat out, and he's an incredible cocktail creator, and so experiment with that. So those are some of the, I'll ski with my other daughter when she's home from college is fun.
Mm.
So I think that, it's a mix of stuff. I do Wordle every day. You got to have your things like that too. So yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. There's the spectrum. I like that a lot. When I do this emotional intelligence profile, which you're familiar with from EI,
Yes. Yes.
it's like one of the things I find a lot of times when we talk about the exhaustion is there's one little dimension on there that's about this sort of joy. We call it the joy score. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes.
That's really related to emotional energy that you have available to be engaged in relationships, particularly in relationships under stress and tension. And when I work with clients where that's low, one of the activities I give them is say, I want you to find a list of 25 things that
Mm,
bring you joy and make sure they fall on a spectrum of the little stuff. Like you mentioned, the Yorkie in your lap, the bigger stuff, which is a ski vacation or going to Maui,
right.
whatever it is, that having that whole spectrum, whether it's good food, I know you have access to really good wine as well.
Yes. True.
Flowing from personal experience.
True.
We
True.
do have that. So that's great. So uh, next question would just be what advice or recommendation or guidance or wisdom, whatever you want to call it, would
Mm,
you share with other women leaders who may be maybe just having some struggle. You've worked with a number of women in a lot of different contexts in
Yeah.
private and nonprofit. You've probably picked up some themes on where you notice women struggle quite a bit. Is there any kind of advice or recommendation that you might give to, well, all leaders, of course, but I know women leaders have different set of struggles oftentimes.
Oh, good question. I think one of them is not new. We hear this a lot, and it's interesting. I did work with Camber Outdoors, which at the time was about getting more women in leadership in the outdoor industry, and when I first was asked to join the board, I was like, no, no. I'm not focused on like what a women leader looks like versus, like I didn't see gender playing into my story, and I felt like it didn't make sense for me at the time. And then I started to learn more about the metrics of gender balanced leadership teams actually create better outcomes. And then, hearing more about, I have always had the benefit of having a women in leadership and mentors. And so recognizing that not everybody has that, right? And so kind of reflecting on my own situation and realizing how privileged it was in a lot of ways that I had been successful, but also I needed to realize like some of that was because I had sponsors and I had people championing. I worked for a company that believed that women in leadership was a good thing and not overlooked. And so I think through that and later when I joined Camber, I learned even more. But one of the things is that taking a risk on yourself, right? Being okay with putting it out for an opportunity, you know, interviewing for a job that maybe you haven't ticked off all 10 boxes, but you have 8. And I say that's still, even myself, I remember when Eric asked me to do the work around impact for the outdoor industry around racial equity. I was like, I feel completely unqualified for this. I had a whole list of like, I don't know that I'm the right person for this. And he's like, no, 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 you have all these contacts, you have a learning mindset. I know you'll do well. And you mentioned earlier, like sometimes you see your career path looking back. I would have never seen that as my career path, right? And so also making sure that I think many women, maybe not just women, but maybe not see a path different than like what is just right in front of them. And so how do you branch out and look at other opportunities and see how your skills are transferable and kind of take that risk on yourself or that leap on yourself for yourself. So that's probably one thing I would say. The other one is just like getting better for all of us. I know for myself, conflict resolution is never something I like run to go do, right? But I will have like a pit in my stomach if I know that I need to deal with something and I haven't dealt with it yet. And so how do you get like good about just entering into that discussion, having it be productive, making sure that you're addressing things versus avoiding your your seesaws made me think about that, right? Like you can be kind and caring and you can be resolve conflict. And the way I would usually hold myself accountable in that area is I just think like you're the leader and you owe it to the company and you owe it to the team to address this. Like you can't let yourself off the hook like that. That's what you've signed up for. And so as a leader, like how do you get to
Mhm.
that? Or how do you say maybe the difficult thing in the room that is maybe people don't want to hear? How do you say it in a way that people can hear it? And then just, hold true to your values through it. So
Yeah. And that's an important piece too, to think about, again, another both end of the focus outside, like what will people be able to hear? What
yes.
ties into what they want or how they're trying to grow, and what does the business need? And
Yeah.
I love that some of the prompter for yourself is there's that internal experience of like, okay, I've got the pit in my stomach. So it's
Yes.
time to do something about that. It takes me back a little bit to what we talked about a moment ago about resourcing ourselves. One of the things that you've done, I think, also is that you have continued to engage in continuous development and education. whether that is what you do through formal programs or what you do through coaching or what you've done through other opportunities that you have taken advantage of or made available to you. Anything you want to say about that?
Well, I think one just tremendous benefit to that is just opening up your circle of people who you know and your exposure to different thinking. Having been at REI for a long time and the outdoor industry for a very long time, finding ways to engage outside of those kind of comfort spots are going to give you an opportunity to kind of learn in a different way. Yeah.
Mhm. All right, my dear. Well, thank you again so much for this time. I so appreciate you and your wisdom and your willingness to be so open and to share all the stuff in all the ways you do. I've seen you speak either live or watching after the fact in a number of different venues and situations, and always you come across in the same way, which is warm and real and caring and so generous with your time and so humble with who you are and how you are. So I appreciate you so much and for being willing to do this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl. It's just, it's incredible to have people like you in my community and network. And I feel so appreciative of just all of the opportunities that I've had and the chance to have people as such as yourself
Mm,
helping me reflect along the way. I know that that was definitely a gift early in my leadership to be able to have the time with you and, to be thinking about how did I want to show up as a new leader and what were my values and how did I demonstrate those?